Every history textbook says the same thing. Humans learned to farm, settled down, and civilization began. New archaeological evidence from the last 2 decades says we might have the order backwards entirely, because before the first crop was ever planted, humans were already getting each other completely, deliberately drunk. 11,000 years ago, in what's now southern Turkey, hunter-gatherers built something nobody expected. Massive stone monuments at a site called Göbekli Tepe, carved with animals, arranged in circles, requiring coordinated labor from hundreds of people across a wide region, centuries before anyone in the area had planted a single crop. Some of those pillars weigh as much as 10 tons apiece, moved without wheels, without draft animals, without metal tools of any kind. Picture the scene. No permanent villages yet, no writing, no metal tools. And yet groups traveled from far outside the immediate area, hauling multi-ton stone pillars into place for a structure with no practical use for hunting or shelter at all. For decades, archaeologists assumed farming came first, and temples, cities, and civilization followed after. Göbekli Tepe turned that timeline upside down. Chemical residue found in massive stone vessels at the site shows signs of grain fermentation, beer essentially, dating back as far as 13,000 years, at least 3,000 years before anyone in the region was farming. Some archaeologists now argue the sequence ran the other way entirely. People didn't build monuments because farming let them settle down. They may have started farming because building monuments required feeding and watering huge crowds of laborers, and the easiest way to get people to show up and keep working was throwing a party too good to skip. In other words, the domestication of wheat, the invention of agriculture, the entire foundation of modern civilization, may not have started with hunger. It may have started with a hangover. A few thousand years later, in ancient Sumer, that relationship between beer and civilization got written down directly. Carved onto a clay tablet is a poem called the Hymn to Ninkasi, dedicated to the goddess of beer, and it doubles as one of the oldest surviving descriptions of the brewing process itself. Malting grain, baking it into bread, soaking it, letting it ferment in a jar, as the waves rise, the waves fall. Some modern brewers have even used it to recreate an approximation of 4,000-year-old Sumerian beer. Historians now debate exactly how literal a recipe it really is. Some argue it's more poetry than instruction manual. But either way, brewing in Sumer wasn't treated as a side chore. It was skilled, respected work, often performed by women serving as priestesses of the goddess herself. By the height of Mesopotamian civilization, brewers had cataloged dozens of distinct styles. Historians count at least 70 named barley beers alone, each with its own recipe and reputation. It's a strange kind of immortality. Of all the technical knowledge that could have been lost to time, brewing was one of the things ancient Sumerians made absolutely sure survived. Skip forward again to ancient Egypt, and partying wasn't just tolerated, it was state policy. Once a year, Egyptians celebrated the Festival of Drunkenness, a religious holiday with one explicit goal: get completely, deliberately obliterated. According to myth, the fierce goddess Sekhmet nearly wiped out humanity until the sun god Ra tricked her into drinking massive quantities of beer, dyed red to look like blood. She got hammered, passed out, and woke up transformed into Hathor, goddess of love, music, and joy. Humanity was saved by beer. So every year, Egyptians reenacted the myth. Participants drank until they collapsed, often in a designated hall built specifically for the occasion, then were woken by the sudden beating of drums, the idea being that in that hazy, half-conscious moment between drunk and awake, you might actually glimpse the goddess herself. The ancient historian Herodotus claimed one version of this festival drew as many as 700,000 people. The scale alone should tell you how central this was to Egyptian identity. This wasn't a footnote in their religious calendar, it was one of its headline events, sponsored by the king himself. Move north a few centuries, to Viking Age Scandinavia, and the party gets literary. Mead halls were the political centers of Norse society. Long wooden buildings where lords hosted feasts. Warriors swore oaths of loyalty over a drinking horn passed hand to hand. and poets called skalds performed the sagas that kept their culture's history alive. The Mead Hall Heorot from the epic poem Beowulf is the most famous example, but real excavated mead halls could hold hundreds of people at once. Here's the twist modern pop culture usually skips. Actual mead, made from honey, was a rare luxury item since Scandinavian beehives produced very little of it in that cold climate. Most Vikings, most of the time, were drinking ale instead. The mead was saved for exactly the moments that mattered most: sealing an oath, honoring the gods, celebrating a victory that was worth the good stuff. Different continents, different drinks, wildly different rules about when celebration was sacred and when it became dangerous, but the same basic human instinct running underneath all of it. Rome shows exactly how dangerous a party can look to the people in charge. The Romans had their own ecstatic celebration, the Bacchanalia, dedicated to the god of wine and revelry. And by 186 BC, the Roman Senate had decided it had gone too far. Officials investigated the cult, accused it of secret oath-taking and conspiracy against the state, and responded with one of the most extreme religious crackdowns in Roman history. Livy records roughly 7,000 people arrested across Italy, with the majority executed. Existing shrines were torn down. Future gatherings were capped at 5 people, meetings required government approval, and breaking the new rules was punishable by death. It remains one of the clearest examples in ancient history of a state deciding that unsupervised joy, at a large enough scale, was itself a political threat. From a hilltop in Turkey to a temple in Egypt to a longhouse in Scandinavia to the Roman Senate itself, the pattern holds for 11,000 years straight. Wherever humans gathered in large enough numbers, drinking and celebration weren't a distraction from building civilization. In more cases than historians once assumed, they were the reason civilization got built in the first place. Maybe that's the real twist buried in all this. We tend to imagine our ancestors as grim, hardened survivalists, fighting for every calorie, with no time for anything but staying alive. The evidence increasingly says otherwise. Before humans figured out how to reliably feed themselves, they had already figured out how to gather, dance, drink, and celebrate together. And some of our biggest, most defining achievements, from the first monuments to the first written recipes to the laws of entire empires, might trace back to people simply trying to keep the party going. It's worth sitting with that for a second. The drive to gather and celebrate may be older than the drive to farm, older than writing, older than most of what we consider the building blocks of civilization itself. We still do this today, on a smaller scale, building stadiums, organizing festivals, shutting down entire city blocks for celebrations that serve no survival purpose whatsoever. The scale is different. The instinct clearly isn't. If a story like this is exactly the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe. This has been Unbound Frontier.